Welcome to episode 2 of the Hack on Hacks podcast. I am again an open micer. I explained what that meant on the first episode, but basically it means I'm an entry level comedian. So I love this show, Hacks, and I wanted to give podcasting a try. So I'm going to go episode by episode. Now we're on episode 2. It's called Primm, written by Paul W. Downs, directed by Lucia Aniello. Here we go. I'm going to mute it, but I'm going to have it on in the background. All right, so it starts off with Shooter McGavin, aka Marty, aka Christopher McDonald. He's squeezing his pelvic floor during a training session, and Deborah walks in. The freeze frame, the way it was freeze framed was pretty great. It reminded me of like how great Lucia is at directing. So, in addition to her writing, but Marty has his legs wide open, like on stirrups, and like fitness stirrups. And Deborah's in front of him with a big smile because she knows he's in a helpless position. And both physically and from the news she's about to drop on him. And another major theme, like I said in the first episode, was Deborah's business acumen. And Deborah says to the personal trainer, "You're putting a lot of effort into this one," implying that Marty bangs all of his personal trainers. And Marty hilariously, he struggles to get out of the fitness stirrups, and lets Deborah know, and Deborah lets him know, actually, I should say, "I'm not doing fewer dates." And Marty has to say some awkward, threatening thing like, "That wasn't a request." And we learn that somehow Steve Wynn found out about the pentatonics and stole them away from Marty. The somehow is the way Deborah says it, strongly implies it was her, but she never actually admits that. But then we get the joke of Deborah has to say, "Take it easy on his pelvic floor." And my favorite thing about these rewatches, you pick up on something new every single time, every episode. And one of the through lines was slipped in by the writers here. So another theme in this show is the battle between like a lot of powerful white men in showbiz or just in general, and Deborah. But we also learned that Marty is the reference in the closing joke we heard in episode 1 during Deborah's introduction into the show about the guy that keeps his shirt on during sex. So the line is, he says, "You really want to try to fuck me here?" And she goes, "Oh, Marty, I'll never be doing that again." And then she looks at the trainer and she goes, "He leaves his t-shirt on, you know." He was the guy who kept his shirt on during sex with Deborah. That was a great reveal right there. And then we get the Ava and Deborah compare and contrast montage. Deborah's up at 5:15 in the morning. She turns on the TV and it's the local weather. It's just some basic old white lady, right? But then she immediately turns to MSNBC to see how the market's looking today. So then we learn, Deborah's involved in a lot of stuff and she's very well versed in a lot of things in the world, especially business. And the song in the background is called Work to Do. So they show her house workers keeping everything in order so she can focus on her work. Another detail that made me fall in love with the show, she has stacks of the major newspapers. She has the Wall Street Journal. It looks like the Wall Street Journal, I should say. That's the one thing that we aren't clear on, but she has her local news. She has the Las Vegas Sun. She has the New Yorker. She has the Washington Post. She has the USA Today. Um, the Wall Street Journal is likely hidden underneath. The only thing you can see is it says journal. But Lucia showed us, like I said earlier, with the MSNBC snippet. So we know about her financial acumen. So they covered that very well. And then it gets back to the I got work to do chorus, and it hits, and one of those chills moments, and it's a quick cut to Deborah rowing on a rowing machine. Shout out to Lucia again. It's like that big three of writing. I'm sure there's a writer's room where it says written by Paul W. Downs. You know that there's other input and other writers in that room, but I just have to say, just to make it look, she's in a battle with herself and she's all alone. So she's basically in the water all by herself, even though it's a rowing machine next to the water, next to her big pool. She's metaphorically, she has to keep rowing all alone on her solo shit and keep hustling. And then we get into the granular details of her business empire. It's her making a coffee, it's her getting the makeup done, and then it's her sitting with, talking about her business empire with Marcus, the COO, and another team member who's a major player in the show, but we don't know that yet. And they're going over the finer details of her popular Fuzzy Sleep Slippers. And that song, it hits again. That work, work. And we learn that she's, how frugal and cost conscious she is. We've talked about that before, but she's wealthy, but she's reheating the coffee from hours before. And like she's not going to let it go to waste. She's anti-waste. And now it's Ava's turn. So cut to her, 10:30 a.m. in a dark Vegas room. The beautiful view of the AC unit and mechanics of the building directly across from her. She's on the elevator with all these typical wasted Vegas morons drinking those 2 foot long drinks. And she's making her way through the casino floor. Some guy's getting arrested for what looks like drunk and disorderly. And then there's the shot of her going down the elevator in her hoodie. It's an Easter egg for one of the funniest moments on the show to come. And then you see, employee cafeteria. And she's going to enjoy the slop all the other Vegas workers have to endure every day in the basement like lounge. And there's smoking everywhere. And this woman lights up a cigarette, a veteran, obviously, of the Vegas. She has her uniform on and she blows it into the vent. And then she goes, the non-smoking section's over there. And then Ava's like, thanks. And then it's a quick cut to her sitting at her lunch area or her dining area, and it's directly behind the woman. And there's a garbage can next to her. So she just decides, I'm going to call Jimmy. And we get learn a little bit more about Jimmy. And it's about his sex life. And he's like, oh, I didn't know it was going to be that ticklish. And Ava cuts him off. And Kayla messed up, and she just nonchalantly, smiles and waves. And he's asking her how she's doing. Are you guys Thelma and Louise yet? She's like, we aren't, but I do want to drive off a cliff. So Jimmy's explaining to her, it's only been a few days, and he reminds Ava what she's doing there. The particulars, like the specifics, she has to punch up jokes. She has to write jokes for her. She has to deal with the QVC material. And then we learn Ava had to sign a 470-page NDA. It's again foreshadowing and Easter egging, all linked to Deborah's, cold-hearted nature when it comes to business and personal relationships. But people can change. That's the main theme of the show. Growth and changing as people, regardless of ages or circumstances. And then it gets a little serious. So Kayla comes in with some comedic relief. She's listening in and laughing, but she's really not listening. She's laughing at a minion meme. But she's a minion now, but another theme. People aren't always as small as they seem. And Jimmy reminds her to take notes. But she also needs, Kayla also needs to leave early because she has an adult ballet recital. And then we find out that Kayla's dad owns half the company. So, as Jimmy puts it, she's essentially my assistant and my boss. And then Jimmy tries to motivate Ava, but she knows deep down she's a self-starter. So she says, if I don't keep moving, I'm going to remember that I'm here. And Ava's kind of like Deborah in that way so far. And then you notice the Jimmy and Kayla budding relationship. I also want to note that, you know, they go back and forth calling each other bud. And instead of yelling at her about having to leave with the recital, Jimmy calls her into his office to discuss it with her. So it seems like he would want to help her with it, which is a very, if he's a cutthroat Hollywood agent, he wouldn't do that. But he's also in a tough spot. So that relationship is budding. And then the worlds collide. We see Ava showing up, and Deborah and Marcus are talking about one of Marcus's side hustles, flipping houses. So they ask Ava her opinion, and they of course choose the exact opposite of her choices. She likes the white. They said, okay, we'll go with the jade. Yeah, absolutely, Deborah says. And then we get to the specifics of, Ava wants Deborah to review her work. And Deborah says, sure. But she asked Ava why she wasn't at the show last night. And she said, oh, I came the night before. I figured it was probably the same. And before she could even say, should I be coming every night to the shows, there's a practical issue. So while the house manager is doing inventory on the refrigerator, Deborah notices that her soda machine isn't working. She has one of those old school soda machines with a bunch of different options with the fountain. And she physically gets the actual, I think it's like the gas that makes it work, or the carbon or whatever it is. And she physically puts her foot on the cupboard and she screws it in herself. It's just such a metaphor. She does the work herself, and then she gets herself some. She takes the Diet Coke, takes a big sip, and does that shit my mom does when she takes a nice sip and she enjoys it. She goes, ah. It was just awkwardly in the background. And she's like, okay, let's go. So then it's back to work. And the house manager, like I said, was doing the inventory, but now we're back into the practical, like, joke writing aspect of it. So Deborah's reviewing her work. Most of these are unusable, she says, but this part works. And she's like, cool, the setup. And then Deborah bluntly and randomly goes, are you a lesbian? And Ava's like, I'm pretty sure you can't ask that. And then Ava goes into her oversharing, of course, this time about her bisexuality. So she says, since you're my employer, it's illegal. And then, of course, she's like, but if you're genuinely curious, I used to only hook up with men, but when I masturbated, I thought about women. So then in college, I finally hooked up with this TA, this amazing TA, Phoebe, and I realized I could connect more emotionally with women, which led to deeper sexual experiences. But sometimes I do still need penetrative sex with a dick to come. But I don't know. Maybe I was just conditioned by the porn that was fed to me by the algorithm, you know? So anyway, I'm bi. And then she gives the head tilt like, yeah, I just told you off, bitch. And, and then one of the best jokes of the episode, shout out to Paul W on that one. She goes, Jesus Christ. I was just wondering why you were dressed like Rachel Maddow's mechanic. All right, so then they go back to the jokes, and she's like, "Oh, you didn't like any?" And she's like, "They're not jokes. They're more like thought poems, as Deborah calls them. A random joke about how bad getting voicemails are." And Ava's like, "It's funny. People hate getting voicemails. They're annoying. It's like just text." And then another theme of the show is like, "Do you need a joke a minute?" So it's like it's funny because you shouldn't do that. Jokes need a punchline. And she goes into like traditional joke structure is very male. It's so focused on the ending. It's all about the climax. She goes, "Well, I just got a TED talk about yours." And then we get to meet another character that everyone falls in love with later on in the show. I don't. It's not a real big spoiler. Just is what it is. And she's on her way to the casino, and she's like, "Why don't you just go to the actual casino?" She's like, "Well, it's filled with people smoking indoors. It's disgusting." And then Ava goes, "Yeah, I know. You make me live in one." And that's like one of those moments, like when in episode one she says, "Or I'll just leave a, or should I? You know what? I'm just gonna leave a stool sample on your, the thing that makes Deborah genuinely laugh." And that's that moment that they just had, and she goes, "Ha!" And so you realize, there is still potential here that they could become something more than just employer employee. And then we get to meet Kiki, and it's like one room over in Deborah's mansion, so it's just a different. They just set it up. So Kiki's describing that her daughter had a 3-year checkup. It just shows that Deborah can be endearing. She can care about people, but she does have a wall up. And Ava just wants the guidance about the jokes. But, she teaches her, like, how to play blackjack. And she's not really into it. And Vegas fucking slaps, is what Kiki tells her. And then we realize, any guidance for me? Always hit on 16 and double down 11. And then she goes like, I mean about the jokes. Anything in particular you want? Yes, there should be more of them, and they should be funny. And then Deborah gets blackjack, and then she starts doing a little dance, and she doesn't give her any advice. And then we have an Ava and Kiki scene, and Kiki goes like this, and it's the Rolls Royce. And we learn whenever Deborah gets a new Rolls, she gets the old one. That's her third. So there's been a long-standing relationship. And this is one of my favorite scenes because we learned so much with just a character you met 30 seconds ago. Ava's trying to overshare. That's a big theme of her character. And Kiki just stops and cuts her off. She's one of the strongest characters in the show, even though she's an ancillary. She starts singing a song. She's like, I need to stop you right here. And she starts singing a song and singing a song. And she teaches Ava a lot in this scene because stops the song and she goes, okay, so you were complaining? Like that helps Ava hopefully at some point realize that she complains too much. And she's no, but then she says, I know I'm lucky to have a job. I just don't understand why she's making it so hard. And Kiki explains, Ava's Ava to Ava, she's like, Deborah's a hustler like me. And you learn that the top that Kiki's wearing is something that she repurposed into a top. It wasn't a cut off glittery top like it was initially. She got it from Deborah and she made it into something better than what she got it as. So here's the line that I love. I had to cut off the sleeves and trim it. Point is, her shit is ugly, but the quality is there. So if you can't make it good, that is on you. So what is Ava doing? She's a comedy writer. What is her job? Her job is to punch up. Her job is to improve her material. Her job is to bridge the gap between their generations. So on the rewatch, that's when I realized what a big line it is. So that's like the whole show in a nutshell. That's not even a spoiler. It just is what it is. That's what you want. You want them to build some sort of relationship beyond just her being the employee and Deborah being the employer, and she's just trying to save her on, you know, this surface level. So we'll just leave it at that for now. A little anti spoiler. And then she says about the playlist. This is something that I do too. She's like, I had to stop talking, but it's a playlist. And she's like, honey, we're on shuffle. Any song can play at any moment. And it's through that randomness that we can receive, that we can totally receive meaning. And I believe in that 100%. I always listen to Spotify Shuffle. Liked all my liked songs. I have like almost 4,000. I just liked songs shuffle every single time. And sometimes in the day, you notice there's a song that is hits at the absolute perfect time. So she's trying to get Ava to sing along, and she can tell she wants to sing, and they have a moment, and that's how they become friends. She breaks down her wall and she starts singing, and then pans out to Vegas, the character that's building, and of course she's in the casino, struggling to plug her charger in, you know, making it around this woman's drink, and the woman's sitting there with her visor just focused, laser focused on her gambling and her, I guess it's like a slot machine. And she's like, I'm sorry, I can't. Ava's like, I'm sorry, I can't write in my room. My neighbors are having performatively loud sex, and the business center is essentially a coke den. So that's where she's gonna work for the day. And we learned that the drinks are on the house in Vegas. That's something that I figured out about a decade ago, unfortunately. And Ava's learning this now, so she's like, you know what? Can I get two? And the waitress goes, I'll bring you three. She's like, oh yeah, we're gonna have some fun today. And so she says, oh, enjoy. And she goes, you too. Like the classic, like, when you get food, oh, enjoy. Oh, you too. But she's blowing the smoke, the vape in circles, the clouds, and she's bonding with this girl next to her. She chugs it. Christina, have fun at Disney World. And she's like, this game is such capitalist bullshit. And then she's like, I won, yeah. And then we just see, the point is she's getting wasted instead of doing her work. But then she wakes up, you hear the performatively loud sex next door. There's a disgusting tray of what can only be imagined as the food she had the night before. And then she opens up her laptop and she's like, oh, I think I actually did some writing. And of course, the song tells the story again. Things are changing. Things are changing. It's looking good. And Deborah reads Ava's latest work before the show, but to Ava's dismay, it's not included. So that's another big theme. In the first episode, she says, I write my own material. So far, they haven't really collaborated aside from what got her hired on the closeted senator joke. So this is Ava's hope that she's going to use it. So Deborah gets her 15-minute warning, and then we cut to Deborah performing, and she's doing her closer. It's about um, watching an adult film in reverse. So in the end, you get rewarded with a pizza. And then we see that Ava's looking really disappointed. And she's like, really? And you can just see it in her face, like, I can't believe this shit. The clock shows 8:55, so you know that her set's up at 9. And then they play the music, and she looks back, like, gives her a little wink, and she's done. She's telling the security, have a good night. And they start arguing, Ava and Deborah. You said my jokes were better, but you didn't use any. And she's like, they were better because you stole them from yourself. Half were from your script. The others were clearly dated rehashes you threw in. And then Ava's surprised, like, you read my script? And she's like, yeah, I had Jimmy send everything you ever done. I do my research. And as Deborah's about to lecture Ava and maybe start giving her some instructions on how to write for her, then life smacks again. And you see Marty's counterpunch. It's a massive billboard just outside of where she performed and at the Palmetto, and it says all you can eat buffet. That's the big thing on the billboard. And then smaller off to the side is a picture of Deborah, and then in smaller letters, before or after dinner, go see Deborah Vance. Then under Deborah's picture it says real crab exclamation point. So she immediately calls Marty, who ultimately says, "You don't make me nearly as much money as Lobster Tail," which is insane that he would say that to her. And he said, "Well, if I don't have pentatonics, I have to promote you." And then he says the line, "And the truth is, you don't make me nearly as much money as Lobster Tail. But if it's any consolation, I bet you taste just as good dipped in butter." She's pissed. But it's like there is this relationship between the two of them that we don't know everything about also. So it's like the will they won't they throughout the show is kind of between Deborah and Marty is a big will they won't they. And it's like a different take on that classic um, and like in all the big shows, like Friends was Ross and Rachel, will they, won't they? Seinfeld, Jerry and Elaine, will they, won't they? But I call this one, it's like a business sexual relationship. I think I just coined that, but that's pretty much what it is. They have this business relationship, but there is this sexual tension. So it's unconventional, will they, won't they? And then the next day, Abra, Abra, Ava apologizes for giving Deborah upcycled material. Like she can't even say, "Oh, I'm sorry, I basically cheated." She has to package it as upcycled. And then the next step, Ava just goes right into crossing out material of Deborah's. She's like, she should probably think about losing that joke about Anna Nicole Smith. She is long dead. And Deborah, lets her have it, of course. And she's like, let me get this straight. You not only don't write me anything funny or even original, and now you're telling me what jokes not to do? So then here we go, a little back and forth. It's just hard to write in her voice because Ava doesn't know her voice. So then you know what? Deborah thinks to herself, okay, that's actually a very good idea. We should go on a little adventure. You want to do it? You want to go on a drive? Okay, cool. Perfect. So we're led to believe this is it. This is where they're about to become buddies. And, you know, the first thing Ava brings up is, what do you think about the climate crisis? And Deborah's just staring forward, uninterested. And she's like, hey, why don't you turn on the radio? Oh, all right. So what does that mean? I mean, she doesn't really want to talk to her. But then back to the jokes. She says, oh, whoa, do you have like huge hands? Because that's one of my favorite recurring bits in the show is Ava's humongous hands. And, Deborah's like, they look like catcher's mitts. Your manicurist must use a paint roller. And then, of course, Ava's like, some people think it's inappropriate or it's pretty cheap to make fun of other people's appearances. And then Deborah goes, yeah, ugly people. Puts on the glasses, and we're back to business. And she needs to get a Diet Coke, of course. But Ava has to go pee. So while she's in there, Ava might as well get her the Diet Coke. And then from the fountain, she says, of course. And Ava's like, goes in there. She's like, and then she gets called back. She calls back to Deborah, and she's like, "Do you use a recyclable cup, a reusable cup?" And then the window just slowly goes up. Deborah puts the window up, and then it's funny because that's her being like, not being frugal. But then they go right back to her being frugal. She's taking two Tic Tacs and consolidating one with the into the other. And then she goes, "Here you go." Ava brings it to her, and she goes, "Where's the change?" She's like, "Oh, it was like 27 cents or something." And she's like, "Go back and get it." And then Deborah gives her the death stare. And Ava's like, okay. I should have finished college, she says. And then of course the real reason is revealed why they're on this actual while they're on this adventure, zooming in the Rolls Royce. It's an antique store. Deborah pulls in back of, and she starts to explain to her, "You see that antique shop there?" And she starts to explain what she needs. She wants her to go in there, and she wants her to get her a pepper shaker, a very particular pepper shaker. She shows her the picture on the iPad. It's what is that? What is that? It's a Jean Royer pepper shaker, and we don't know why she's so obsessed with it, but we do learn that it's something very important to her. And then Ava realizes that's why you drove me out here. You didn't want to get to know each other. You just wanted a pepper shaker mule. And then, of course, Deborah just doesn't care about explaining about that. She just says, when you go in there, just casually browse, look at a couple things. But when you get to the time to buy it, offer him five, but go up to 10 if you have to. So all this time she was being so cheap, but she's willing to spend $10,000 for a pepper shaker. So that's like a symbolic thing in the show is the pepper shaker. We'll get to that in a few minutes, but she says, "Don't mention my name." Deborah says to Ava, "Don't mention my name," and that he loves the story. So she sends her back in there, and of course, after Ava closes the door, she leans in the window and goes, "I hope you're donating regularly to Planned Parenthood." And then Deborah honks and sends her in there. So then there's a this face off between the antique store owner and Ava. And he's like, can I help you find something special? And Ava's trying to play the part, just browsing, just browsing. And she's looking at the tag and she's picking up the things. And the guy's trying to size her up and see what she's all about. And she ends up picking up the most expensive thing in the entire shop. And she says, "How much is this?" And he goes, "Oh, you have great taste. That's one of the most valuable pieces in the store." And she's like, "Oh, okay." And then he explains it's French, and he even names the family that bought it. Purchased by a member of the, I'm not even going to try to pronounce that family name, but at auction in 1932 or 1930. It's worth 32,000. Yeah, but he could do 28 today. And she's like, "Okay, maybe." And you can tell she's just getting sick of playing this role. And she's like, "Oh, it just occurred to me. Do you have a pepper shaker?" So the guy's looking at her like, "A single pepper shaker? Interesting." She's like, "Yeah, I love them." And he's like, "I did list one just today." So he's on to her, that's for sure. And eventually, you see his reflection looking at into the pepper shaker, and he's like, "Oh shit." And she's like, "Would you do 5,000?" And he goes, "Are you here for Deborah Vance?" And she goes, "Yes." And then Deborah storms into the store. "Well, well, well," the guy says. She shows her face. "I can't believe you would stoop so low as to hire some niche escort off Craigslist to do your dirty work." And that song "Dirty Work" will be used later on in the show. That's just another shout out to how they use the music. It's so well done. Um, but yeah, so we're learning about their relationship, and he's like, "I will never sell to you," and she's like, "Get over it. Do you know how many years that I put in with that rancid woman or whatever?" And he's like, "I played Parcheesi with her." And then the point is, Deborah bought the whole estate sight unseen. So she's like, "It's a free market." Of course, going back to her business acumen. And then she goes up to 20,000 instantly. And she goes, "Okay, name your price." And then we get some big time character development. That's a theme in this episode is the ancillary characters giving you gold on character development for the main characters. So Kiki did it with Ava, and now this man, I don't even know his name, is going to do it with Deborah, the antique store owner. And she's like, "What's your price then?" After offering 20,000, he goes, "An apology." That, based on what we've talked about so far, that's the camera zooms in on Deborah's face like, "Fuck you." Like that's a bridge too far. And then it just cuts to her shaking her head in the car. Obviously, she didn't apologize to him. So Ava's sitting there like all pissed off, and she's about to have we don't know yet, but it's a Snickers. You know the line, "You're not quite yourself unless you've had a Snickers. Hungry? Why, So she's like, no eating in the car. Deborah says that. And then she starts sucking down her Diet Coke, of course. And then it's starting to brew over. We're starting to realize Ava can't take this shit anymore. She's just like, oh. And before we get to that point, the tire blows out. And the Rolls Royce has a flat. And it looks like they're in the middle of nowhere. So how are they going to fix this? And they said earlier, before they left on this adventure, I should have mentioned that they had a show. That Deborah has a show that night. You know, she has the record, as we said in episode 1, the record for most shows. And she has one that night. She says, no, it's okay, I'll speed. And so Ava's like, all right, should we get the spare? And Deborah looks at her and goes, it's a Rolls Royce, not a Suzuki Samurai. There is no spare. And then they get, of course, Ava's getting pissed. And she's like, should we call AAA? And Deborah's like, my show's in 90 minutes. I can't wait. So she's immediately on the phone with someone named Danny. And she's like, I've got a flat. Yeah, I need a ride. A ride. So we're going to find out what that means in a little bit. And she explains she's on Vegas Boulevard, about 15 minutes north of Primm. So the way they named the episode is based on that. 15 minutes north of Primm. The episode's called Primm. And Ava's examining the tire. It's completely shredded to the bone. And the birds cawing in the distance, the ants crawling on the ground shot, and then it cuts to them just sitting there in the car. Like, you know, they're not going to put on the radio. They're just sitting there with the windows down. And she's like, "Are you just?" Ava goes to Deborah, "Are you just going to sit there and give me the silent treatment?" And she goes, "It's not silent. You're breathing very loudly." There's always so many moments of where it's about to get serious, and the writers are so good at just breaking that tension with a great one-liner. And that's what, you know, it's not silent. You're breathing very loudly. And she said, it's going to be hard to work together if we can't even communicate. And then another theme, we don't work together. You work for me and not very well. So that's, like I said, a major theme. They're definitely not equals right now, but could that happen? Could they grow both as people and maybe become pals? I don't know. This is only episode 2, right? Okay, so here we go. After she called the ride, they're sitting there. Now they're really having it out. And she goes, Deborah goes, you couldn't even do the one thing I asked. And then she's like, I'm sorry I couldn't haggle for your, tchotchke or whatever, but I'm a comedy writer. And then Deborah storms out of the car. This is a cool thing. I didn't realize that the Rolls Royce had that orange umbrella that you can just take out of the driver's side. And then Ava tries to psychoanalyze. She's like, this is not about the salt shaker or the pepper shaker. You're just butthurt about that billboard. Oh, great psychoanalysis. Oh, I get it. You're a therapist. That explains it. You're certainly not a writer. That's what Deborah, hurts her. And this is like the first episode. Except it's reversed. Ava said something that made Deborah go back and say, get out of my house, basically. And now Deborah says something to Ava that makes Ava fight for herself. And she's like, I never know where you want me to be or when. You don't give me any feedback. You're making it really hard. And that's just like episode 1. Deborah was willing to ignore it. Now she turns around and she has to let her know that you don't know what hard is. That's a big theme of the show. Of course, we talked about how entitled Ava is, how she always thinks that everything should go her way. She thinks everything should happen for her right now. She thought in the first episode that a flight on Spirit was the struggle, and having to watch some clips of Deborah was a struggle, and going out there because she got canceled was a struggle. And then Deborah hits her with the realness. She goes, hard? You don't think you think this is hard? You don't know what hard is. You got plucked off the internet at what, 20? You just got lucky. And then Ava's like, I may have been lucky, but I'm also good. And she's like, well, I hope so. Good is the minimum. It's the baseline. You have to be so much more than good. And even if you're great and lucky, you still have to work really fucking hard. And even that is not enough. You have to scratch and claw, and it never fucking ends. And it doesn't get better. It just gets harder. So don't complain to me that I'm making your life hard. You don't even know what that means. And then, of course, they have to break the tension again. The helicopter comes in. Oh, good, my ride's here. So yeah, her ride wasn't a car; it was a helicopter, and it was a local weather chopper or the local news chopper. And Ava's like, I'm not comfortable riding in that. She's like, good, you're not. You got to take the car back. And then Ava's like, you're leaving me here? She's like, yep. And don't run the AC. It's low on gas. And then she says, lucky for you, you don't have to suffer through another one of my shows. And then she tosses her the keys. Ava catches it. She goes, nice catch. And then she points at her hands, not surprised. What a show. And then Ava's like, oh, yes, I'm stuck here, you know? I guess I got to figure out what to do. So then she's sitting on top of the car, another sign that she doesn't really give a fuck about Deborah or, her stuff. And she's sitting there with the white, she's a white cut off, white tank top, and she spills the Snickers all over herself. She's like, oh, oh, and then she just goes, fuck it. And that's a big, like, she's becoming more of who she needs to become. She has to address her problems and she has to actually deal with the stuff. But then she goes right back to calling Jimmy, and then you find out Jimmy Lusac Jr., that's his name. It's his office. And then Kayla, some more comedic relief. She's like, who's this? We got to go to the club, girl. Oh, it's Ava, when she realizes it. And Jimmy, she has a call with Jimmy. And Jimmy's like, she's on the verge of being dropped. We didn't know that. She's on the verge of being dropped from Jimmy's agency. And she instantly talks about a different writing room to get in. And she's like, oh, he's like, oh, the job you quit 11 days into because you thought it was basic. And then he explains, Ava, they wanted me to drop you, the partners, and that he used the job with Deborah to try to convince them. And then you also learn that Ava's the very first person Jimmy signed. So he's vested in her success. I mean, they did have a CGI bot. That was his first client they joke about, but it really is Ava's the first person. And then that she has to find Ava has to find a way to prove to Deborah that she's worth it. So then she goes, "Do I have big hands?" And then Jimmy's like, "I don't think so." And then Kayla's listening in again by accident, and she's like, "Yeah, you do, girl." Some more comedic relief. And then it's the sun's going down. Deborah's rushing to put her wig on and get back on stage, and she shakes away the last, of the makeup. Ladies and gentlemen, Deborah Vance, and she's on the stage doing her thing, right back to smiling and being a professional. And Ava's told that the donut, it cuts back to Ava, the donut on the car doesn't fit. She can't go any more than 15 miles per hour. So it's time for her to, the sun's setting, it's time for her to make her way back home. Or is it? She has to make her choice. Is she going to give up, or is this the moment that she starts to become who she's going to be as the show goes on? So she opens the door to the antique store, and the guy goes, I'm closing. And he goes, Jesus, what happened to you? She has dirt all over her face. She looks all messed up. And, they show them pouring the alcohol. She vents to him. She overshares with him. And she said, and then we learn her dad had a stroke. And he says, for your punishment, you have to go work for that woman. Poor girl. And then she does a callback to the randomness line about the music. She said, I think from the randomness we can totally receive meaning. And for her, the meaning now is in that pepper shaker. So she's trying to level with the guy. And he looks at her like, I feel you. I understand what you're going through, but she's like, I'm stranded in the desert and I'm asking you to sell me this antique pepper shaker. Otherwise, she'll lose the job that she hates, but she needs. And so this is the moment you think, oh, he's just going to, it's for her, not Deborah. So please help me. Will you just sell me the pepper shaker? And there's the moment where he's wondering, he's looking at her. He just goes, no. And, Ava's like, okay, I respect that. I have to respect that. And he's like, good luck. So you think she's just going to walk away and that's it. But then something snaps and she picks up the most expensive thing. And he goes, are you out of your mind? She's like, sell me it. I have nothing left to lose. I'll do it. And then he goes, you think you have nothing in common with Deborah Vance? You're the same. I mean, he says they're both psychotic bitches, but I think that was just his opinion of it, and the point of the writers, Paul, let me know, please let me know. I think the reason that he had that ancillary character say that is because, just to point out, they are way more similar than they are different. And that's a big point of the show, is that even though she's way younger, even though she's her politics are different, at heart they're both comedians and they're both writers and they're both comedic writers that have very strong sense of morals and how they want to move through the world. Okay, so the point is, she's like, you have 3 seconds, and he's like, think of the family, and she's like, I don't give a fuck about the family. They probably own slaves. Fuck you, Lemony Snicket. She counts 1, 2, 3, and then the doorbell chimes. It cuts to the pepper shaker in the box, pristine. And she's like, and no, there was no change. And she gives it to Deborah. And she's like, Deborah's like, it looked like you had a hard day. And Ava's like, yeah, I had a pretty hard day. And then chills moment again. She's like, Deborah's like, oh, we can start tomorrow morning. I can be ready at 10 a.m. And Ava's like, okay. No complaints, no nothing. The piano music hits. She has that slight smirk, and you realize that they're building this rapport with each other and then mutual respect. And then you see Deborah puts the pepper shaker, right next to the matching salt shaker. She has this satisfied smile on her face. She looks at all of the other salt shakers and pepper shakers. And then the camera pans out. She has a shrine with beautiful lighting to all these different salt and pepper shakers. And then we go back, um, and Ava's walking into Deborah's mansion, and she goes, "Oh, good morning. So I have been thinking more about what you said, and you're right. You do need to get to know to write for me. For real?" And Ava's skeptical, and Deborah's like sincerely like, "For real." And she leads Ava to her next project. It's a room full of files and old school, like every joke she's ever written and every TV appearance over the last 40 years. And she wants her to and Deborah wants Ava to digitize it. And then Deborah's like, before you say anything, I know you're a writer. That's all material, honey. And then, of course, the song ends perfectly. Why can't we be friends? I'm not going to sing anymore, but that's how it ends. Directed by Lucia Aniello. And I'm sorry if I pronounced that name wrong. I did look it up and I still may have mispronounced it, but perfect once again. Hacks, Season 1, Episode 2. Primm, written by Paul W. Downs and directed by Lucia Aniello.